What if I told you that a 1978 thriller about a fake Mars mission actually predicted the rise of conspiracy theories, government disinformation campaigns, and media manipulation tactics that define our current information landscape? We're going to take a look at a movie that got dismissed as post-Watergate paranoia schlock, featured an all-star cast in an absurd premise about NASA faking space exploration, sparked decades of moon landing conspiracy theories, and ended up being a terrifyingly accurate blueprint for how institutions manufacture consent through elaborate deception. Yes, it's time to explore why Capricorn One was way ahead of its time, and we all missed the media manipulation masterclass while laughing at the ridiculous plot. Now, before we dive into why everyone treated this as paranoid fantasy, we've got to understand what America thought about government deception and media manipulation in 1978. And trust me, it was a completely different world than the post-truth hellscape we navigate today. Picture this. It's 1978, and America is experiencing peak post-Watergate disillusionment. Nixon had resigned 4 years earlier, the Pentagon Papers had exposed government lying about Vietnam, and public trust in institutions was at an all-time low. People were questioning everything, and Hollywood was responding with paranoid thrillers that reflected national anxiety about government corruption. Enter Peter Hyams, a writer-director who wanted to explore how far institutions would go to protect their interests. The space program seemed like perfect material. NASA was struggling with budget cuts, the Apollo program had ended, and public interest in space exploration was waning. What if the government decided to fake a mission to Mars to maintain funding and public support? The premise wasn't entirely crazy. The Apollo program had cost billions, and some people were already questioning whether the moon landings were real. Hyams took this nascent conspiracy thinking and created a sophisticated thriller about institutional deception, media complicity, and the manufacturing of reality for political purposes. But here's the thing. Audiences in 1978 still had basic trust in major institutions. While people were suspicious of government after Watergate, the idea that NASA would fake an entire space mission seemed like pure paranoid fantasy. The concept that government agencies could successfully orchestrate massive deceptions with media cooperation was outside most people's imagination. The timing was everything. This was 1978. Before the internet, before social media, before anyone understood how information could be systematically manipulated on a massive scale. So what happened when Capricorn One launched into theaters on December 15th, 1978? Well, let me put it this way. Critics and audiences took one look at this government conspiracy thriller and immediately dismissed it as paranoid entertainment riding the post-Watergate anxiety wave. The reviews were mixed, but generally condescending. The New York Times called it an entertaining paranoid fantasy, but dismissed its premise as preposterous. Most critics acknowledged the film's technical competence, but treated its conspiracy themes as exploitation of contemporary anxieties rather than legitimate social commentary. The marketing didn't help either. The trailers emphasized the action sequences and star power while downplaying the sophisticated media manipulation themes. Audiences came expecting a straightforward thriller about astronauts in danger, not a complex examination of how institutions manufacture reality through coordinated deception. I remember discovering this on cable in the 80s and being completely focused on the wrong elements. I was there for the chase sequences and Elliot Gould's investigative reporter heroics. The stuff about media complicity and government deception, the warnings about how easily public perception could be manipulated, the questions about institutional coordination in manufacturing false reality, that all seemed like ridiculous conspiracy nonsense compared to watching astronauts escape from the desert. The film was making serious points about information control and media manipulation, but everyone was too focused on the action thriller elements to notice the sophisticated commentary underneath. The accidental prophecy. But here's where things get really interesting, and why I think Capricorn One deserves recognition as the most prescient conspiracy thriller ever made. This paranoid fantasy accidentally predicted almost every aspect of modern disinformation campaigns and conspiracy culture that defines our current media landscape. Let's start with the big one: coordinated institutional deception. The film shows how government agencies, private contractors, and media organizations can work together to manufacture false reality for public consumption. The fake Mars mission requires cooperation between NASA, the military, television networks, and corporate sponsors. Sound familiar? Because that's exactly how modern disinformation campaigns work, from state-sponsored propaganda to corporate astroturfing. The film's depiction of media manipulation was decades ahead of its time. Television networks aren't just reporting the Mars mission. They're actively participating in creating the false narrative. The broadcasts are carefully staged productions designed to convince the public rather than inform them. Today, we call this manufactured consent, and it's the foundation of modern propaganda. But it gets even more prophetic when you look at the technology aspects. The film shows how television footage can be manipulated, how staged events can appear authentic, and how technical sophistication can make lies indistinguishable from truth. This was 30 years before deepfakes, CGI manipulation, and digital editing made video evidence completely unreliable. The conspiracy culture elements were remarkably prescient. Elliot Gould's journalist character starts as a skeptic, but gradually uncovers evidence of massive deception. His investigation process, connecting seemingly unrelated events, finding patterns in official narratives, questioning institutional credibility, perfectly mirrors how modern conspiracy theorists operate, except he's actually right. And here's what really gets me: the film's understanding of how conspiracy theories spread. The movie shows how institutional lies create information vacuums that get filled with speculation, how cover-up attempts generate more suspicion than the original deception, and how people who discover uncomfortable truths get dismissed as paranoid cranks. The social media dynamics were predicted decades early. The film demonstrates how manufactured controversy generates engagement, how emotional manipulation overrides rational analysis, and how people choose beliefs based on psychological comfort rather than evidence. These are exactly the mechanisms that drive modern conspiracy movements and disinformation campaigns. Even the economic incentives were accurate. The Mars mission deception is driven by budget concerns and political pressure rather than malicious intent. Today's disinformation industry operates on similar principles. Institutions manufacture false narratives to protect financial interests and maintain public support. The film understood that information control would become the primary tool of institutional power, that media would evolve from reporting to manufacturing reality, and that technology would make deception increasingly sophisticated and difficult to detect. So why did everyone miss these incredibly prescient themes? Simple: we weren't informationally or technologically ready for this conversation about systematic media manipulation and conspiracy culture. Think about what information control looked like in 1978. There were 3 television networks, a handful of major newspapers, and limited ways for alternative narratives to reach mass audiences. The idea that institutions could systematically deceive the public seemed impossible because information sources were too centralized and professional journalism maintained credibility. The pre-internet media landscape made it impossible to understand what Capricorn One was really predicting. This was before cable television fragmentation, before alternative media, before anyone could imagine how information ecosystems would become tribalized and manipulated. The concept that different groups could live in completely separate reality bubbles was outside most people's experience. Post-Watergate cynicism actually worked against the film's message. While people were suspicious of government, they still trusted major institutions like NASA and mainstream media. The idea that these organizations would coordinate massive deceptions seemed like paranoid fantasy rather than realistic possibility. The film's premise felt too extreme for audiences who still maintained basic institutional faith. The scientific establishment wasn't prepared for conspiracy culture either. The space program represented American technological achievement and international prestige. Questioning NASA's credibility seemed unpatriotic rather than legitimate skepticism. The idea that scientific institutions could be compromised by political pressure was outside mainstream thinking. Academic and intellectual communities struggled with these concepts too. Conspiracy theories were considered the domain of cranks and paranoids rather than legitimate political analysis. The vocabulary for discussing systematic disinformation, media manipulation, and institutional coordination simply didn't exist in serious discourse. The thriller movie context created additional barriers. Audiences expected conspiracy films to be entertainment rather than social commentary. When a movie features elaborate government plots and action sequences, it's hard to take the information control themes seriously. The timing was just all wrong. Capricorn One needed an audience that understood digital manipulation, had experienced coordinated disinformation campaigns, and could imagine how institutions might systematically deceive the public. Instead, it got 1978 audiences who saw a paranoid thriller and moved on. But here's the beautiful irony. Everything Capricorn One predicted about conspiracy culture and media manipulation is our current reality. And suddenly that paranoid fantasy doesn't seem so paranoid anymore. We're living in Dr. Kellaway's world. Government agencies coordinate with private companies and media organizations to manufacture public narratives. Technology enables sophisticated deception that's impossible to detect. And institutional credibility has collapsed under the weight of revealed corruption. When intelligence agencies manipulate social media, when corporations astroturf grassroots movements, when governments coordinate disinformation campaigns, they're following the exact playbook Capricorn One outlined. The conspiracy theory dynamics are no longer fictional. People question official narratives, alternative media challenges, institutional accounts, and information warfare has become standard political practice. The film's vision of skeptical investigators uncovering institutional deception perfectly describes how modern conspiracy movements operate. The media manipulation aspects have proven devastatingly accurate. Television networks manufacture reality rather than report it. Social media algorithms amplify engagement over truth. And public perception is shaped by coordinated campaigns rather than organic information flow. The film's core questions: how easily can institutions deceive the public? And what happens when people lose trust in official narratives? Are no longer philosophical. They're practical, urgent, and defining our current political and social reality. So there you have it. Capricorn One, the movie everyone dismissed as post-Watergate paranoia, was actually the most prophetic conspiracy thriller ever made. While we laughed at the absurd premise of faking a Mars mission, this film quietly predicted the disinformation campaigns, media manipulation, and conspiracy culture that define our current information landscape. The tragedy isn't that Capricorn One failed to warn us. It's that we failed to recognize how easily institutional deception could become routine. Today, as we struggle with fake news and conspiracy theories, we're living in the world the film predicted. Thanks for watching. Hit that like button if you think institutional trust is permanently broken, and let me know in the comments. What's the most believable conspiracy theory you've heard?